Father and son vanished in Alaska. 7 years later, hunters find this buried in ice. A mystery that haunted an entire community for nearly a decade was about to reveal its chilling truth. The wilderness of Alaska, both beautiful and merciless, had finally decided to give up one of its darkest secrets. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The midnight sun cast long shadows across the pristine wilderness of the Brooks Range as John Smith adjusted his camera equipment. Once celebrated for his breathtaking wildlife photography that had graced the covers of National Geographic, John had retreated from the spotlight years ago. His weathered hands, marked by countless adventures, now guided his 10-year-old son Michael through the Alaskan terrain. "See how the light hits the ridge," John pointed, watching as his son's eyes widened with wonder. Michael nodded, clutching his own small sketchbook, his constant companion since his mother's departure 3 years earlier. This 3-day expedition was more than just another outdoor adventure. For John, it represented a chance to rebuild what had been broken between them: the long absences, the missed school events, the silence that had grown in their small cabin outside Fairbanks. Michael had become increasingly withdrawn, and John hoped the wilderness would speak to his son as it had always spoken to him. Their first day passed uneventfully as they hiked deeper into the mountains. The father pointed out animal tracks, while the boy sketched everything from Arctic foxes to unusual rock formations. That night, huddled in their tent as temperatures dropped, John noticed his son smiling for the first time in months. On the second day, as spring's thaw loosened winter's grip on the landscape, they veered slightly off their planned route. Michael had spotted something unusual, a pattern in the retreating snow that didn't match the natural flow of the terrain. "Dad, look." The boy pointed toward a narrow ravine where the ice had receded to reveal what appeared to be a perfectly circular depression. John frowned, consulting his detailed maps. "That's not marked anywhere," he muttered, his experienced eyes scanning the area with growing curiosity. That evening, John made his scheduled radio check with the ranger station. His voice betrayed none of his excitement as he reported their coordinates and confirmed they were safe. After signing off, he turned to Michael, whose eyes shimmered with anticipation. At dawn, they approached the strange formation. The survivalist felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Arctic air. Something about the perfect symmetry felt deliberate, ancient. Their final radio transmission came at 3:17 in the afternoon. Robert Johnson, the bush pilot who had flown them in, would later recall the unsettling calm in John's voice. "We found something. It's not on the map. We're going in." Then, silence. The search began 24 hours later when they missed their extraction. For weeks, teams combed the vast wilderness. Helicopters circled overhead while expert trackers followed vanishing trails. Sarah Smith abandoned her geological research in Colorado to join the search for her brother and nephew, but the Brooks Range kept its secret. No equipment, no footprints, no distress signals, nothing. The Smiths became a cautionary tale told around campfires, a reminder that the wilderness doesn't always return what it takes. For 7 years, the story of John and Michael Smith haunted the North like a ghost that refused to rest. The Brooks Range had always been unforgiving, but after the Smiths vanished, locals spoke of it differently, as if the land itself had developed an appetite. Indigenous elders warned their young ones to stay clear of the area where the father and son were last heard from. Even hardened researchers, who normally scoffed at superstition, avoided mentioning the Smith disappearance in anything above a whisper. "Bad energy there," Anna Brown's grandmother had told her, long before Anna became a guide herself. "The ice remembers, and sometimes it takes." The mystery had faded from national headlines, but in Alaska, it remained etched in collective memory. Search and rescue teams still used the case in training exercises, though most believed there would never be answers. Sarah Smith had visited twice in those 7 years, leaving cairns of stones as if marking a grave without a body, before returning to her geological surveys with a hollowness behind her eyes. Then came the thaw of an unusually early spring. The sun seemed to burn through winter's grip weeks ahead of schedule, exposing parts of the glacier that hadn't seen daylight in decades. A group of 4 caribou hunters, led by a veteran tracker named Eli, were crossing a remote glacier shelf when they noticed something peculiar, a dark bulge in the ice, unnatural and out of place. "At first we thought it was just debris," Eli would later tell authorities. "Maybe part of an old plane wreck. The north is full of them." But as they approached, the hunters realized this was different. The ice had formed a perfect dome around whatever lay beneath, as if protecting it. Against their better judgment, and despite the stories they'd all heard around campfires, curiosity overcame caution. Using ice axes and the tools they had on hand, they began to chip away at the frozen casing. What they discovered sent shockwaves through the tight-knit Alaskan community, a sealed military container, preserved by the cold, alongside items that could only have belonged to the missing Smiths. Within hours, their satellite phone call reached the ranger station, and by nightfall, the news had spread across the state. Robert Johnson, now retired and haunted by his role in the original search, was among the first to hear. He set his coffee mug down with trembling hands and stared out at the mountains visible from his cabin window. "They've found something," he whispered to himself. After all this time, the land had finally given up its first secret, but no one yet realized it was merely the beginning. The hunters stood in stunned silence as they carefully extracted the military container from its icy tomb. The metal box, perfectly preserved by the frigid temperatures, bore no identifying marks, just a series of numbers etched into the side that had long since lost their meaning. Beside it lay a child's boot, small and red, unmistakably belonging to a young boy. The sight of it sent chills through the men that had nothing to do with the Arctic cold. "This is Michael Smith's," whispered one of the hunters, a local who had participated in the original search 7 years ago. "I remember his father bought him these boots for the trip." The reel of film they discovered nearby was encased in a protective covering, somehow untouched by time and the elements. But it was the bundle of birch bark maps that truly captivated them. Delicate sheets covered in intricate symbols, lines that swirled and curved like frozen rivers, and markings that resembled no cartography any of them recognized. The hunters radioed their findings to the nearest outpost, their voices shaking with the magnitude of their discovery. Within hours, the news had spread across Alaska like wildfire, jumping from isolated communities to research stations, from bush pilots to government offices. The legend of the Smiths, which had slowly faded into campfire mythology, suddenly blazed back to life. "The symbols look almost like constellations," noted an archaeologist who was flown in to examine the artifacts. She pointed to circular patterns on one of the maps, her finger tracing connections between dots that mimicked Orion's distinctive shape. But they're mapping something on the ground, not the sky. Most puzzling was the largest map, which depicted a location that simply didn't exist on any official survey. The topography showed a valley nestled between 2 distinctive peaks, with a glacier formation unlike anything documented in the Brooks Range. Experts pored over satellite images and historical surveys, finding nothing that matched. The discovery transformed the tight-knit Alaskan community. Those who had known John and Michael Smith emerged from the shadows of grief, bringing forward forgotten stories and overlooked details. The military container remained sealed, its contents a mystery that would require special equipment to access without damage. Each artifact whispered its own story. The boot spoke of vulnerability. The film promised revelation, and the maps hinted at knowledge beyond conventional understanding. But together, they shouted a truth that could no longer be ignored. John and Michael Smith had not simply vanished. They had found something worth documenting, something worth mapping. And now, after 7 years of silence, that discovery was calling new searchers to follow where they had gone. Sarah Smith had spent 7 years refusing to believe what everyone else had accepted as fact. The geologist's office walls were covered with satellite images, weather reports and search grids, all focused on the remote area of the Brooks Range, where her brother and nephew had vanished. While authorities had long closed the case, labeling it as just another tragedy claimed by Alaska's unforgiving wilderness, Sarah knew her brother John was too experienced to simply get lost. "There's something they're not telling us," she muttered, carefully unfolding one of the birch bark maps recovered from the glacier. Her trained eyes studied the strange markings, recognizing geological formations that shouldn't have been visible to an ordinary observer. John had always had an uncanny sense for the land, but these maps showed something more, deliberate patterns that suggested he had discovered something significant. The authorities had dismissed the maps as desperate survival attempts, but Sarah recognized her brother's methodical mind at work. Each symbol was placed with purpose, each line drawn with precision. As she traced the swirling patterns with her fingertip, she became increasingly convinced that John had stumbled upon something that powerful people wanted to keep hidden. Her phone rang, breaking her concentration. It was the postmaster from a tiny Alaskan town where John had maintained a post office box. "Ms. Smith, something strange happened today. A child came in with a key, said he found it frozen in the ice during a fishing trip. It opened box 43, your brother's box." Sarah's heart raced. "Was there anything inside?" "Just one envelope. Looks like it's been there for years." 3 days later, Sarah sat alone in her apartment, staring at the yellowed envelope. The key that had opened the box was unmistakable, a small brass key attached to a hand-carved wooden bear that Michael had always worn around his neck. How it had separated from him and found its way back to civilization was yet another mystery. With trembling hands, she opened the envelope. Inside was a letter titled, "If We Don't Come Back," in John Smith's distinctive handwriting. Beneath it lay another map, not drawn on birch bark, but on faded construction paper. Sarah recognized it immediately as something John had created as a child, a fantasy map of secret places only he could see. "I found it, Sarah," the letter began. "The place I've been searching for since we were kids, the place no one believes exists. Michael sees it too. If something happens to us, don't trust what they tell you. Follow the old map, the one I drew when I was 10. It wasn't imagination after all." Sarah pressed the letter to her chest, tears streaming down her face. Her resolve hardened into certainty. Whatever had happened to her brother and nephew, she would find the truth, no matter who tried to bury it. Sarah Smith wasn't alone in her quest for answers. The morning after the birchbark maps were discovered, her phone rang with a call from an unexpected ally, Robert Johnson, the retired bush pilot who had flown countless hours during the original search operation. Had heard about the discovery through the tight-knit Alaskan wilderness community. "I need to be part of this," Robert told her, his voice carrying the weight of 7 years of sleepless nights. "I owe it to John and the boy." What Sarah didn't know was that Robert carried a burden heavier than the Arctic winds. During the original search, he had made a secret detour at John's request, a flight path that wasn't in any official record. The weathered pilot had altered his flight logs, erasing evidence of a location John had been adamant about exploring. This deception had gnawed at Robert's conscience for years, leaving him desperate for redemption and closure. "I should have reported everything," he confessed when they met at the small airfield outside Fairbanks. His eyes, lined with age and regret, couldn't meet Sarah's gaze. "Maybe they would have found them if I had." The expedition gained another crucial member when Anna Brown, an Inupiat guide with a doctorate in Arctic studies, approached them after examining photographs of the recovered maps. The indigenous researcher traced her finger over the swirling patterns that others had dismissed as random markings. "These aren't just drawings," Anna explained, her voice quiet but firm. My grandmother spoke of these symbols. They mark what our elders called a kunigak, the between-lands. Anna spread her own maps across the table, pointing out correlations between Michael's drawings and ancient Inupiat cartography. For generations, her people had passed down stories of places where the boundaries between worlds grew thin, where time itself behaved differently. Western science had dismissed these tales as mere legend. This isn't just about finding your family, she told Sarah. These maps could validate knowledge my people have preserved for centuries. For Anna, this expedition represented more than a search and rescue mission. It was a journey to reclaim indigenous wisdom, long ignored by modern researchers. Knowledge about the land and its secrets that might finally be taken seriously if they could prove what John and Michael had discovered. As the three unlikely allies gathered supplies and finalized their plans, Sarah realized that each of them carried their own motivation into the frozen wilderness. Her quest for family, Robert's search for absolution, and Anna's mission to validate her cultural heritage had converged into a single path forward, one that would lead them into the heart of the Brooks Range and the mystery that waited there. The wind screamed like a wounded animal as Sarah Smith pulled her parka tighter around her shoulders. The outpost, little more than a collection of weather-beaten cabins clinging to the edge of the Brooks Range, offered minimal shelter against Alaska's relentless elements. Here, even in what passed for spring, the ground remained stubbornly frozen, a testament to nature's dominion. The temperature readings from the ice cores are unlike anything I've documented before, Dr. Richard Davis announced, spreading his charts across the rickety table. The climate historian had spent 15 years studying glacial anomalies, but his usual academic detachment had given way to something more fervent. See these layers. They show unusual warming patterns exactly 7 years ago, precisely when John and Michael disappeared. Robert Johnson merely grunted, his weathered face revealing nothing as he checked their equipment. The retired bush pilot had seen enough of Alaska's mysteries to know when to speak and when to listen. His hands moved methodically over the satellite phone, ensuring their tenuous connection to the outside world remained intact. We leave at first light, Sarah declared, studying the birch bark maps with the intensity that had defined her geological career. The container was found here, she pointed, but these markings suggest we need to head northwest from that position. Anna Brown, who had been quietly observing from the corner, finally spoke. My grandmother's people have stories about this region, the Inupiat guide said, her voice soft yet commanding attention. They speak of Nunakpa, the belief that the land itself moves, shifts beneath your feet when you're not watching. Like tectonic activity? Dr. Davis asked, his scientific mind immediately seeking rational explanation. Anna shook her head. More than that. The elders say the land remembers and responds. Storms aren't just weather here. They're messages, warnings or invitations, depending on how you listen. The team exchanged glances, their reactions split between skepticism and unease. Sarah caught Robert's eye, noticing how the pilot's hands had stilled on his equipment, his attention fully captured by Anna's words. My brother wasn't one for superstition, Sarah said carefully, but he respected the land. Whatever he and Michael found out there, she couldn't finish the thought. The ice preserves, Dr. Davis murmured, almost to himself. Not just bodies or artifacts. Sometimes I think it preserves moments, memories. As darkness fell, the outpost creaked and settled around them. Outside, the vast Arctic silence pressed against the windows like a living thing, watching, waiting. The team prepared their gear in this uneasy quiet, each lost in private thoughts about what tomorrow might bring. None of them slept well that night. The wind spoke in voices almost human, and the ground beneath them seemed to pulse with ancient rhythms. By morning, they would step into a wilderness that had already swallowed 2 lives whole, guided only by a child's drawings and legends older than memory itself. The expedition's first 3 days unfolded in a delicate balance of scientific precision and growing unease. Sarah Smith led from the front, her geologist's training evident in how she traced the contours of the land against the birch bark maps. The GPS devices they carried began malfunctioning as they ventured deeper into the unmarked territory, their screens flickering with phantom coordinates before going dark altogether. "Just like John described in his notes," Sarah muttered, pocketing the useless device. The air around them seemed different here, thinner yet somehow heavier with possibility, shimmering with cold that bit through their thermal gear. Robert Johnson kept his eyes on the horizon, his weathered face revealing little. The retired bush pilot recognized landmarks that shouldn't exist according to his flight maps, yet matched perfectly with the crude drawings on the birch bark. Each evening, as temperatures plummeted and the midnight sun cast long shadows across the ice, the team huddled around Anna Brown's camp stove. The Inupiat guide prepared traditional tea while they spread Michael's drawings across their makeshift table. The child's artwork depicted smiling figures with elongated limbs and shadowy companions that seemed to dance at the edge of perception, like ghosts rendered in charcoal, watching from just beyond the firelight. "My nephew always had an active imagination," Sarah said, her fingers tracing the outline of one particularly detailed figure. "But these don't feel imagined." Dr. Richard Davis remained skeptical, meticulously documenting temperature anomalies in his journal. "Children process trauma through art," he offered, though his voice lacked conviction. On the fourth morning, Anna woke them before dawn. "We need to see this in first light," she insisted, leading them up a steep ridge that hadn't appeared on any satellite scan. What awaited them silenced even the most doubtful among them. Atop the flat expanse of the ridge stood a perfect circle of stones, 17 in total, arranged with mathematical precision. The pattern was unmistakable to anyone familiar with the night sky. "Orion," Robert whispered, his breath clouding in the frigid air. "The Hunter constellation." Sarah felt her heart race as she remembered how Michael had been obsessed with stars, particularly Orion. John had bought him a telescope for his 9th birthday, and the boy had spent countless nights mapping the heavens. Anna knelt beside one of the stones, brushing away frost to reveal spiraling patterns carved into its surface. "These markings are fresh," she said quietly, "not weathered by years of exposure." Dr. Davis approached cautiously, scientific detachment faltering. "That's impossible, unless—" Sarah completed his thought, "unless time moves differently here, just like the recording suggested." Above them, despite the daylight, Orion's stars seemed to pulse faintly in the Arctic sky, as if the heavens themselves were acknowledging what waited below, buried in ice and memory. Dr. Richard Davis stared at his handheld device in disbelief. The thermal imaging scanner displayed readings that defied everything he knew about Arctic geology. Beneath the glacier's surface, a pocket of warmth pulsed like a heartbeat. "This is impossible," he muttered, recalibrating the equipment for the third time. "We're registering temperatures 15 degrees above what should be possible at this depth." Sarah Smith peered over his shoulder, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. The geologist in her was equally perplexed by the anomaly. Could it be geothermal activity? "Not in this formation," Richard replied, his scientific certainty wavering for the first time since they'd begun the expedition. Anna Brown approached silently, her experienced eyes studying both the readings and the scientist's reactions. The Inupiat guide's expression changed as understanding dawned across her features. "My grandmother spoke of this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The Kuliagnik, the warm place, where the world beneath the ice still breathes, where time moves differently." Robert Johnson shifted uncomfortably, adjusting his heavy gloves. The retired pilot had seen many strange things in his years flying over Alaska's wilderness, but the reverence in Anna's voice made him uneasy. "We need to investigate further," Sarah decided, her determination to find traces of her brother and nephew overriding any hesitation. They carefully excavated the area above the heat signature, chipping through layers of compacted snow and ancient ice. 4 hours into their work, Sarah's tool struck something soft. "I found something," she called out, her hands trembling as she brushed away ice crystals. The team gathered around as she gently extracted a small piece of blue fabric, a fragment of a child's sweater, Michael's sweater. The wool was remarkably preserved, as though it had been frozen only days rather than years ago. Beside it lay an unusual contraption, a makeshift recording device crafted from aluminum scraps and pine wood, sealed against the elements with what appeared to be tree sap. "John built this," Sarah whispered, recognizing her brother's ingenuity. "He was always making things from whatever he could find." Richard connected the device to their portable power source. After several tense moments of adjustment, a haunting sound filled their small circle, static and crackling, followed by a voice they'd been searching for across 7 years of silence. "It listens. It learns." John Smith's voice emerged, trembling with what might have been cold, fear, or both. "We stayed too long." The recording ended abruptly, leaving only the wind's howl and 5 stunned faces in its wake. Sarah clutched the fragment of her nephew's sweater to her chest, tears freezing on her cheeks before they could fall. "What was he talking about?" Robert asked, scanning the endless white horizon. "What listens?" No one answered, but they all felt it then, the unsettling sensation of being watched by something ancient and patient, something that had been waiting beneath the ice all along. Sarah Smith's hands trembled as she spread Michael's drawing across the makeshift table in their camp. The intricate lines formed what appeared to be a solar tracking system, with the glacier's surface meticulously mapped against celestial movements. The geologist squinted, comparing the child's work with the scientific data on her device. "This isn't random," she whispered, her analytical mind racing. Michael was tracking something specific. Robert Johnson leaned over her shoulder, his weathered face reflecting concern. "What do you see?" "It's a time map," Sarah explained, tracing the patterns with her fingertip. He was tracking the sun's movement across the glacier surface, but she paused, inputting calculations into her satellite data program. The results made her breath catch. "This only makes sense for a 48-hour window," she continued, disbelief evident in her voice. "A window that occurs once every 7 years, when the sun hits this exact section of ice at a specific angle." Anna Brown nodded solemnly. "The elders speak of such moments, when the boundaries thin." The Inupiat guide's eyes reflected ancient knowledge passed through generations. "The next window begins tomorrow," Sarah realized, checking her calculations twice. The coincidence was too perfect to be chance. Had they been drawn here precisely for this moment? While the team processed this revelation, Dr. Richard Davis announced he would scout ahead alone. Despite Robert's objections about safety protocols, the climate historian insisted, claiming he needed to verify temperature anomalies before the potential window opened. "Until 2 hours?" Sarah agreed reluctantly. "Then we come looking." Hours passed with no sign of Davis. The team was preparing a search party when a figure emerged from the swirling snow. It was Davis, but something was different. His face was severely frostbitten, his eyes wild with an unsettling intensity. Most disturbing was the hiking stick clutched in his gloved hand, now covered in freshly carved spirals and figures that hadn't been there before. "Richard." "What happened?" Sarah approached cautiously, recognizing the artistic style immediately. "I found it," Davis muttered, his voice hoarse. "Or it found me." The carvings were unmistakable, the same swirling patterns and distinctive figures that appeared in Michael's drawings. The style was identical, down to the way certain lines curved and connected. "Did you carve this?" Robert demanded, but Davis only shook his head, his eyes never leaving the stick. "But he's still here," Davis whispered. "The boy is still here, and he's trying to show us something. Anna examined the carvings, her expression grave. These are doorway symbols. In our stories, they mark passages between worlds. Sarah clutched the time map tighter, understanding dawning. They weren't just looking for Michael and John. They were being invited to follow them. The sky darkened without warning, transforming from pale blue to an angry slate grey within minutes. Sarah Smith pointed to the approaching wall of white on the horizon, her voice tight with urgency. "Blizzard coming. We need shelter now." Robert Johnson, his weathered face creasing with concern, consulted his GPS device, which flickered erratically in the rapidly dropping temperature. "There's a depression about half a mile east. Might be our best bet." The team raced against the storm, their breath-forming clouds that were immediately torn away by the strengthening wind. Anna Brown led them toward a narrow crevice in the glacier wall that widened unexpectedly into a cave system, its entrance nearly invisible against the white landscape. "In here," she called, ushering everyone inside just as the first violent gusts hit, carrying stinging pellets of ice. Inside, the temperature rose noticeably, not warm, but sheltered from the brutal wind chill. Dr. Davis switched on his headlamp, the beam cutting through the darkness. What it revealed stopped everyone in their tracks. The cave walls were covered with hundreds of handprints, small, childlike impressions pressed into the mineral-rich clay that lined portions of the ice cave. Some appeared ancient, faded to mere outlines, while others looked disturbingly fresh, as if made hours ago. Anna moved closer, her headlamp illuminating one particular print. Her sharp intake of breath echoed in the chamber. "This one," she whispered, tracing the air just above the impression. "I recognize it from the photos. The slight curve of the thumb, the small scar on the index finger." She turned to Sarah, eyes wide. "This is Michael's handprint, perfectly preserved." Sarah reached out with trembling fingers, stopping just short of touching the wall. "How is this possible? Some of these look new." Outside, the blizzard's fury intensified. The ice cracked and groaned like gunfire, the sound reverberating through the cave system. The team huddled deeper inside, setting up emergency blankets and lighting a small camp stove that cast eerie shadows across the handprint gallery. Hours passed, but sleep eluded them. Each crack of ice, each whistle of wind through distant passages seemed deliberate, a language they couldn't quite understand. Dr. Davis obsessively photographed the handprints, muttering calculations about preservation and time dilation. "Do you feel that?" Robert asked suddenly, his voice barely audible above the storm. They all did, a weight to the silence between the storm's sounds. A presence, a waiting. Something in the darkness beyond their small circle of light seemed aware of them, listening, assessing. Sarah clutched Michael's weathered notebook to her chest. "We're not alone here, are we?" Anna shook her head slowly. "My grandmother would say we've entered a thin place, where what was and what is exist together." She glanced toward the unexplored passages. "And something knows we're here." The morning light filtered through the thinning clouds as the storm finally relented. Sarah Smith brushed frost from her gear, her geologist's mind already working to connect the fragments of their discovery. Spreading Michael's maps across a flat rock, she compared them to the latest satellite scans on her device. "This doesn't make sense," she whispered, tracing a finger along a ridgeline. "These formations, they weren't here 7 years ago." The team gathered around her, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air. What Michael had drawn as a child somehow matched geological features that had only recently emerged from the shifting ice. Valleys where there had been solid glacier, lakes where there had been stone. "It's as if he could see what the land would become," Sarah said, her voice catching, as if something was showing him. Anna Brown nodded solemnly. "The elders speak of those who can walk between times. The land reveals itself differently to children." Dr. Davis scoffed, but his eyes betrayed fascination. "Impossible, unless—" He trailed off, already lost in calculations and theories. Robert Johnson stood apart from the group, his weathered face troubled. The retired bush pilot had been unusually quiet since they'd found the cave entrance. Now he cleared his throat. "There's something I need to tell you all," he began, his voice heavy with 7 years of guilt. "The official flight logs from the search, I altered them." The team fell silent. Sarah's eyes narrowed. "John asked me to fly him over a section that wasn't on any map. Said he'd seen something from one of his wildlife photography trips." Robert's gaze dropped to the ground. "When they disappeared, I was afraid they'd blame me for taking them off course. So I changed the log." "That detour?" Sarah pressed, stepping closer to the pilot. "Where exactly was it?" Robert pointed to a spot on Michael's map, the very path that had led them to the cave system. "You knew all this time?" Dr. Davis accused, his voice rising. "Oh, people died searching in the wrong areas." "I thought I was protecting myself," Robert admitted, "but it's haunted me every day since." Trust fractured among the team. Arguments erupted. Accusations flew as cold as the wind around them. But Sarah remained focused on the maps, on the impossible knowledge her nephew had somehow possessed. "It doesn't matter now," she finally said, silencing the others. "What matters is that we're here, and so are they." Somehow, as if in response, a low rumble echoed through the glacier beneath them, not threatening but almost welcoming, like a voice too deep to form words. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling John's presence in every icy echo. Whatever had happened to her brother and nephew went beyond simple disappearance. They had found something ancient, something alive. And now, so had she. Anna Brown traced her finger over the strange symbol etched into the makeshift recorder. Her eyes widened with recognition, a memory surfacing from childhood nights spent beside her grandmother's fire. "This symbol," she whispered, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "My grandmother told stories about it. The Inupiat elders spoke of a boy who could walk between winters, a child who existed outside of time." Sarah Smith leaned closer, her geologist's skepticism momentarily suspended. "Well, what does that mean exactly?" "The legend says this boy could step into one winter and emerge in another, years apart," Anna explained. "He left markings like these as doorways between times." She paused, weighing her next words carefully. "We always dismissed it as a teaching story, something to explain the unpredictable nature of the Arctic. But now..." Robert Johnson, who had remained silent during their discovery, finally spoke. "John mentioned something similar during our last flight together. I thought he was just tired, rambling about Michael seeing things that weren't there yet." The team exchanged uneasy glances. The boundary between myth and reality had grown thin in this place where the ice never truly died. Even Sarah, with her scientific background, could no longer deny the pattern of impossibilities surrounding her nephew's disappearance. Meanwhile, Dr. Richard Davis had withdrawn from the group, his behavior becoming increasingly erratic. The climate historian spent hours pressing his ear against the glacier walls, notebook in hand, scribbling frantically. "It's recording everything," he muttered when Robert approached him that evening. "Don't you understand? This isn't just ice. It's the oldest archive on Earth." His eyes were wide, rimmed with red from lack of sleep. Every footstep, every whisper, every story ever told here, the glacier remembers. The bush pilot backed away slowly, concerned by the change in his teammate. "You should get some rest, Richard." "Rest?" The historian laughed, a hollow sound that echoed through the cave. "How can I rest when I can hear them, the voices in the ice, Michael's voice?" That night, as the team huddled for warmth in their sleeping bags, Sarah woke to find Davis missing. She discovered him deeper in the cave system, on his knees before a wall of pristine ice, whispering questions to the frozen surface as if conducting an interview. "What did you show them?" he pleaded with the glacier. "Where did you take them?" The scientist pressed his forehead against the cold surface, desperate for communion with whatever force had claimed John and Michael Smith. His breath formed delicate frost patterns that, to his fevered mind, resembled answers taking shape. messages from a realm beyond understanding. No one slept soundly after that. The glacier's silence felt deliberate now, as if it were listening, waiting for the right question or the right person before revealing its secrets. Each new discovery came at a steep cost. Sarah Smith's fingers had turned an angry red, despite her thermal gloves, the first signs of frostbite setting in. Robert Johnson's weathered face showed the strain of sleepless nights, while Dr. Richard Davis had grown increasingly withdrawn, muttering calculations to himself. The team's supplies dwindled faster than anticipated, and with each passing day, trust eroded like ice under warm breath. "We need to consider turning back," Robert suggested one evening, his voice carrying the weight of experience. "The weather's turning against us." Sarah shook her head firmly. "My brother and nephew are out there. I can feel it." The deeper they ventured into the glacier's heart, the more the environment defied explanation. Inside the cave system, the cold didn't numb as expected. It burned, like fire flowing through their veins. More disturbing was how memories sharpened within these icy walls. Sarah found herself recalling conversations with John from childhood with perfect clarity. The pilot remembered flight paths he hadn't thought about in decades. It was as if the ice preserved not just physical objects but moments in time. "Ni, the elders speak of places where the veil between worlds grows thin," Anna Brown explained, her breath forming intricate patterns in the frigid air. "This is such a place." When a government official radioed their satellite phone about potential mining surveys in the region, Anna's usually calm demeanor shattered. The Inupiat guide slammed her fist against the ice wall, sending crystalline echoes through the cave. "This land is sacred," she argued fiercely. "Can't you see what we've found here? The symbols, the artifacts, they prove what my people have always known." The team gathered around as Anna traced her fingers over a series of spiral markings etched into the cave wall, identical to those on Michael's drawings. The geologist studied them with growing wonder, recognizing that some were recent additions while others had been carved centuries ago. "Michael didn't create these symbols," Sarah whispered. "He recognized them." Anna nodded solemnly. "Some boundaries exist for a reason. The mining would destroy everything, not just the physical space, but whatever force exists here that Michael connected with." That night, as temperatures plummeted to dangerous lows, Dr. Davis approached Sarah with trembling hands. "I've been mapping temperature variations," he said, eyes wide with excitement or madness. "Perhaps both. There's a pattern, a pulse. This glacier isn't just ice. It's alive." Robert exchanged worried glances with Sarah. The historian was slipping away from them, just as the outside world seemed increasingly distant and irrelevant. Yet none of them could deny the strange pull of this place, a feeling that they stood at the threshold of something ancient and aware. After 3 days of meticulous work, the film reel from the military container yielded its secrets. Sarah Smith hunched over the makeshift viewing station they'd assembled at the outpost, her breath creating small clouds in the frigid air as the first images flickered to life. The footage showed John Smith adjusting the camera on a tripod, his weathered face both determined and apprehensive. 10-year-old Michael stood beside him, bundled in layers that couldn't hide his excitement. The timestamp confirmed it was taken 2 days after their last radio contact. "We found something incredible," John's voice crackled through the speakers. "I need to document this in case—" He trailed off, glancing at his son with a protective instinct that made Sarah's heart ache. The camera followed as father and son approached what appeared to be an ordinary ice wall. John placed his gloved hand against it, and to everyone's astonishment, the surface seemed to yield slightly, revealing a narrow passage. "Ready, buddy?" John asked, his voice steady despite the uncertainty in his eyes. Michael nodded eagerly. "I can feel it breathing, Dad." Robert Johnson leaned forward, his weathered face illuminated by the projection. "That's the exact location I dropped them off," he whispered. "But there was no cave entrance visible from the air." The footage tracked their careful entry into the glacier cave, headlamps casting eerie shadows across crystalline walls that seemed to pulse with an inner light. John's camera work grew increasingly unsteady as they ventured deeper, capturing glimpses of formations that defied natural explanation. Ice sculptures that resembled human figures, perfectly preserved ancient plants, and strange symbols etched into the walls. Then came static, 30 seconds of snow and distortion before one final, haunting frame, Michael, standing at a threshold where ice met absolute darkness, his small arm extended, pointing into the void. Unlike his father's obvious tension, the boy's face showed pure wonder, his smile inviting the viewer to join him in whatever lay beyond. Sarah replayed this moment dozens of times throughout the night, studying her nephew's expression for clues. Anna Brown sat beside her during the final viewing, her fingers tracing the similar symbols they'd found on the birch bark maps. "He wasn't afraid," Sarah whispered. "Oh, why wasn't he afraid?" The realization dawned slowly as she connected this footage with John's journals and the letters he'd left behind. Her brother hadn't simply taken Michael on a wilderness adventure. He'd been searching for something specific, something he believed would protect his son from a world growing increasingly hostile and corrupted. John knew, she told the others as morning light filtered through the outpost windows. Whatever's out there, he'd glimpsed it before, and he believed it would keep Michael safe in ways he couldn't. Dr. Davis nodded solemnly. The question is, safe from what? The discovery left them speechless. Nestled within the glacier's heart, a pocket of inexplicable warmth had preserved the Smiths' campsite in perfect stasis. Sarah Smith approached with trembling hands, recognizing her brother's methodical organization, everything arranged with the precision of a man who knew the wilderness demanded respect. "It's like they just stepped away," she whispered, running her fingers over John's notebook, left open to a half-finished entry dated 2 years after their disappearance. The team moved through the site with reverent caution. A pot still held the remnants of a stew, the spoon resting against its rim, as if waiting for someone to return. Michael's drawings were pinned to the makeshift shelter walls, evolving from childish sketches to increasingly complex maps of star patterns and land formations that shouldn't exist. Robert Johnson discovered the recorder tucked beneath John's sleeping bag. Unlike the crude device they'd found earlier, this one contained dozens of entries, meticulously dated and preserved by the strange thermal anomaly. "We've been here 734 days, John's voice crackled through the device, steady despite the circumstances. "The land shifts around us. When we try to leave, paths circle back. Michael says it's protecting us. I'm starting to believe him." Dr. Davis frantically documented temperature readings, muttering about thermodynamic impossibilities. "This defies every natural law," the climate historian insisted, his scientific certainty crumbling before their eyes. Later entries revealed John's growing acceptance of their situation. Michael can communicate with it somehow. The cave responds to him, provides what we need. Yesterday, he drew a fish in the frost, and today we found a pool teeming with them. I don't understand, but I've stopped questioning. Anna Brown nodded knowingly as she translated symbols carved into the cave walls. "My grandmother spoke of children who could speak to the land," the Inupiat guide explained. "The stories say they were chosen because their hearts weren't yet hardened against believing." The final recording, dated nearly 3 years after their disappearance, sent chills through the group. Michael says we're in between, not lost, but waiting. Time moves differently here. He's growing, changing. Sometimes I see something ancient in his eyes. He says someone will come when it's time, but we can't go back to the world we left. That world isn't ready. Sarah sank to her knees beside her brother's belongings, understanding finally washing over her. The land hadn't taken John and Michael, it had chosen them, particularly the boy. Michael had awakened something dormant in this ancient place, something that had been waiting for someone who could truly see it. "They're still alive," she whispered, certainty filling her voice. "And Michael is becoming something we can't comprehend." The morning sun crested over the ridge, casting long golden rays across the glacier's surface. Sarah Smith shielded her eyes as the light caught something moving at the edge of the ice field. The team fell silent, their breath visible in the crisp air. There, silhouetted against the brightening sky, stood a solitary figure. "Michael?" Sarah whispered, her voice catching. The boy, no, the teenager now, stood motionless on the glacier's edge, watching them with an unnerving stillness. 7 years had transformed John's son. His frame was taller, leaner, his face weathered beyond his years. But those eyes, those unmistakable eyes that Sarah had seen in countless family photographs, remained the same, though now they held something ancient and knowing. Robert Johnson fumbled for his binoculars, hands trembling. "It's him," the pilot confirmed, his voice breaking. "God help me! It's really him." Anna stepped forward cautiously, recognizing the way Michael stood, feet planted firmly like someone who understood the land's secrets. The Inupiat guide had seen this stance in elders who communed with sacred places. "He's not just surviving here," she murmured. "He belongs." Dr. Davis frantically scribbled notes, his scientific mind struggling to process what his eyes witnessed. "Impossible," he muttered. "No, the temperature alone should have—" Michael raised one hand in acknowledgement, then turned away. "Wait!" Sarah called out, her voice echoing across the expanse. She began running toward her nephew, boots crunching through fresh snow, but the mist rolled in suddenly, thick, impenetrable, as if summoned. When it cleared minutes later, Michael was gone. Where he had stood lay a small object half buried in snow. Sarah reached it first, dropping to her knees. A recording device, modern, unlike the makeshift contraption they'd found earlier. Frost clung to its edges, but it appeared functional. With trembling fingers, Sarah pressed play. Static crackled, then cleared. "You found us." Michael's voice had deepened, but remained recognizable. A child becoming a young man. "Don't try to take us back, we're not done yet." The team gathered around the device, faces pale in the morning light. "Us," Robert repeated. He said, "Us. John is alive too." Sarah clutched the recorder to her chest. "What happened to you?" she whispered, though her nephew was long gone. In the distance, the glacier groaned and shifted. Anna looked toward the sound, her expression grave. "The Betweenlands are speaking," she said. "They've claimed them both." Dr. Davis stared at the spot where Michael had stood, his scientific certainties crumbling. "How?" he asked no one in particular. How could they survive?" Sarah rose slowly, her eyes fixed on the mist-shrouded path her nephew had taken. "Maybe," she said quietly. "Survival isn't what happened here at all." Sarah Smith stood at the edge of the glacier, tears freezing on her cheeks before they could fall. Her heart was simultaneously breaking and soaring. Michael was alive, but he wasn't coming home. The recording device clutched in her trembling hands held the proof that her nephew had survived, yet chosen to remain in this mysterious realm that existed beyond conventional understanding. "He's not lost anymore," she whispered to herself. "He's found something we can't comprehend." As the Arctic wind whipped around her, Sarah finally understood what had driven her brother all those years ago. John hadn't been running from civilization merely to protect Michael from its corruption. His greatest fear had been that his son, this extraordinary child with perception beyond his years, would evolve into something the modern world could never accept or understand. The Betweenlands hadn't claimed them. They had chosen it. Back at camp, Robert Johnson sat alone, his weathered face illuminated by the pale glow of their portable heater. When Sarah approached, the retired bush pilot looked up with eyes clearer than they had been in 7 years. "I should have told someone about that detour," he confessed, his voice steady for the first time since they'd begun this journey. "But John made me promise. He said Michael had dreams about this place before they ever came here." Sarah placed her hand on his shoulder. Some paths have to be followed, no matter where they lead. Robert nodded, finally unburdened of the guilt that had haunted him since that fateful flight. Do you think they're happy here? I think they're where they're supposed to be, Sarah replied. Across the camp, Anna Brown carefully wrapped the birchbark maps in protective cloth. The Inupiat guide had recognized something in Michael's markings that resonated with her people's oldest stories, tales of places where time moved differently and the boundaries between worlds grew thin. My grandmother would say the land chose Michael, Anna said as Sarah approached, just as it's chosen others throughout time. Her dark eyes reflected determination as she continued, I'm going to fight for this place when we return. The mining companies, the developers, they can't be allowed here. Will anyone believe what we've found? Sarah asked. Anna smiled. They don't need to believe in Michael's story. They just need to believe this land deserves protection. As the midnight sun cast long shadows across the ice, the three of them stood together, united by their shared experience of the impossible. The mystery of John and Michael Smith hadn't ended. It had transformed into something more profound, a reminder that some bonds transcend ordinary reality, and some secrets belong to the wild places that still exist beyond human understanding. Richard Davis stood at the edge of the glacier, his weathered face reflecting both exhaustion and wonder. The climate historian who had once approached this expedition with scientific detachment now gazed at the ice with reverence. The Brooks Range had transformed him completely. It's alive, he whispered to Sarah as they packed their equipment. This glacier isn't just ice, it's memory frozen in time. His fingers traced the symbols he'd meticulously copied from Michael's drawings into his own journal. John and Michael didn't just disappear, they found a doorway. The scientist had already submitted his resignation from the university. He would establish a small research station near the glacier's edge, dedicated to documenting the anomalies in temperature, time, and perception that surrounded the site. The academic community might dismiss his theories as the ravings of a man who'd spent too long in the cold, but Davis no longer cared about conventional recognition. They've given us a gift, he explained to Anna as they shared a final cup of coffee at the outpost. A chance to understand that our relationship with the wild isn't what we thought. The Inupiat guide nodded, recognizing in his fervor the same reverence her elders had shown when speaking of sacred places. Sarah packed the film reel and her brother's notes carefully into her backpack. Unlike Davis, she would return to civilization, but with a mission to protect this place from those who might exploit it. The military container they'd found suggested others had known about the anomaly long before John discovered it. She wouldn't let Michael's sanctuary become a laboratory or tourist attraction. Robert Johnson prepared his bush plane for departure, his shoulders lighter than they had been in 7 years. I'll fly over sometimes, he told Sarah, just to check on Davis and make sure the area stays undisturbed. The pilot had finally found peace in knowing that the Smiths hadn't simply vanished. They had found something extraordinary. As spring sunlight bathed the mountains in gold, the team gathered one last time at the stone circle that mirrored Orion's constellation. Each of them had been changed by what they'd witnessed. Skepticism transformed to wonder, guilt to acceptance, scientific curiosity to spiritual awakening. This place was a tragedy in our minds for so long, Sarah said, her breath forming clouds in the crisp air. Now it's something else entirely. The Brooks Range would continue to hold its secrets, but no longer as a place of dread. The legend of John and Michael Smith would evolve from cautionary tale to something more profound, a story of discovery, of boundaries crossed, and of the wild's capacity to transform those who truly listened. As they departed, each following their separate paths, the glacier seemed to shimmer behind them, watching, waiting, remembering. The story of Michael Smith's survival transformed from hushed whispers into something approaching legend throughout Alaska and beyond. What began as a local mystery evolved into a tale that spread across research stations, indigenous communities, and even academic circles. Some researchers called it a scientific anomaly, a rare case of extreme adaptation to Arctic conditions. Others, particularly among the Inupiat elders, spoke of ancient spirits awakened by the boy's pure belief and connection to the land. Sarah Smith published her findings in a controversial geological journal, carefully omitting certain details that she felt belonged only to her nephew. Her account focused on the unusual thermal anomalies and time distortions within the glacier system, phenomena that attracted climate scientists from around the world. Dr. Richard Davis established a small research outpost near the Discovery site, his obsession now channeled into methodical documentation of what he called temporal inconsistencies in the ice record. The Betweenlands, as Anna Brown had named it, became a place of pilgrimage. Families of missing persons traveled there hoping for miracles of their own. Indigenous youth came to reconnect with stories their grandparents had told. Even Robert Johnson returned annually, flying groups of respectful visitors to the outskirts of the protected area, never venturing too close to the ridge where the original discovery was made. Anna successfully lobbied for the area to receive protected status, working with tribal councils and conservation groups. This isn't just about preserving land, she would explain at community meetings. It's about respecting boundaries between worlds that we barely understand. Local hunters and guides developed their own rituals when passing near the glacier. They left small offerings, a carved piece of wood, a bundle of dried herbs, or sometimes just whispered words of respect. Most avoided staying after sunset, when the boundaries seemed thinnest. On nights when Orion hangs directly above the ridge and the temperature drops suddenly, causing the glacier to crack and groan like a living thing. People from nearby settlements report seeing a solitary figure, a young man, no longer a child but carrying himself with the quiet confidence of someone who has seen beyond ordinary existence. Stands watching. His gaze remains fixed on the horizon, patient and knowing. He's waiting, an elderly Inupiat woman once told a documentary crew before refusing to say more. Not for himself, but for us. For when we're ready to understand what he's learned, those who claim to have glimpsed Michael say he never approaches, never speaks. He simply watches, as if guarding a threshold only he can see, waiting for someone with the courage to follow where he has gone. The legend of John and Michael Smith endures in the remote corners of Alaska, whispered around campfires and debated in academic journals. Their story, part tragedy, part miracle, has become more than just a disappearance case. It's a testament to the bond between father and son that transcended ordinary understanding and perhaps even time itself. Sarah Smith returned to her geology work, but with a renewed purpose. She established a research foundation dedicated to studying the anomalies in the Brooks Range, carefully balancing scientific inquiry with respect for what Anna Brown had taught her about sacred spaces. Each spring, she makes the journey to the ridge where she last glimpsed her nephew, leaving small tokens, colored stones and astronomy books that mysteriously vanish overnight. Robert Johnson never flew again after the expedition. The retired bush pilot found peace in a small cabin overlooking the mountains, where he carves intricate wooden figures resembling the symbols from Michael's maps. Local children visit him for stories, and he tells them about courage, forgiveness, and listening to the land. Anna Brown succeeded in having large portions of the area designated as protected indigenous heritage sites. Her advocacy work gained international attention when satellite imagery revealed unusual thermal patterns beneath the glacier, patterns that matched exactly what Michael had drawn 7 years before his reappearance. Dr. Richard Davis published controversial papers about chronological displacement in Arctic environments before retreating from public view. His colleagues report occasional correspondence from remote field stations, where he continues measuring what he calls memory imprints in the ice. The military container and its contents remain classified, but rumors persist of government teams quietly monitoring the area, particularly during the 7-year cycle when the sun aligns precisely with the stone circle on the ridge. Hunters and hikers occasionally report glimpsing a young man moving effortlessly across impossible terrain. Some say he leaves messages in frost on tent walls, coordinates, equations, or simply "not yet." What truly happened to John and Michael Smith may never be fully understood. Perhaps they found something ancient awakening beneath the thawing permafrost. Perhaps they discovered that the boundaries between worlds are thinner in places where human footprints rarely fall. The Between Lands wait, patient as the ice that preserves every story ever whispered across its surface. And somewhere in that vast wilderness, a father and son continue their journey, not lost, but transformed by something greater than themselves. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, only witnessed. And when the time comes, Michael knows exactly how to find his way back to us. The question remains whether we will be ready to understand what he has become.